Over half of adults over the age of 25 have acne, and yet it still feels like we don't know what causes it or how to treat it. Well, today I am sharing scientific studies on a potential cause of acne that you can do something about, and this applies to both adults and adolescents. But I'm pretty sure you've never heard of it because no one is talking about it. Not even dermatologists. Hey there, I'm Mish, and I am a full-time researcher with my PhD, and by day I conduct and publish studies of my own, whereas by night I share the results of other people's studies here to help you reach your weight loss, fitness, health, and nutrition goals. And if you struggle with acne, I am right there with you because I had fairly bad acne from when I was 12 until last year when I did a pretty big lifestyle overhaul. One of those things was the thing I'm going to tell you about today, conveniently. However, the rest of this video is just going to be about science. And in this video, I'm going to give you some background, and then I'm going to tell you the solution, as well as some very concrete ways that you can implement the solution that may help you with your acne, as well as some other issues that I will talk about more in a little bit. Now, one weird aspect of acne that I don't see discussed very often is the fact that it pretty much only affects people living in westernized or industrialized society. So essentially city living folk or people who are part of a larger system that includes a lot of cities. And studies have shown that people living in more tribal settings or hunter-gatherer type societies don't have acne. So for example, studies have found that when they looked at 1,300 people from different tribes living hunter-gatherer type lifestyles, they found not a single zit. So what you would expect based on what we see in westernized populations is about half of them should have had at least a zit. In fact, even worse on average. But instead they found not even one in 1,300 people. And you may be thinking, well, is that just genetics? Maybe these groups just have a different gene pool. But when you actually have these people move to cities or more industrialized settings, they develop acne. So what's the difference? Well, one obvious candidate is diet, because obviously people's diets change pretty drastically when they go from hunter-gatherer to city living. And a lot of people do think that diet contributes to acne. However, there are all sorts of people doing all sorts of very strict diets, in fact, entire diets devoted to mimicking this type of hunter-gatherer lifestyle, and yet still that has not been found to be a consistent solution for acne. So while diet, of course, plays some role, it's pretty clear that diet is not the reason that people have acne, at least the foods themselves. So what else could it be? Well, looking at the mechanisms that we actually know are involved in acne could maybe give us a clue. And one of those key mechanisms is hormones. So you probably noticed this yourself because people tend to get way more acne when they go through puberty and their hormones are going crazy. And women tend to get acne in line with their menstrual cycle. And related to this, we also see that adult acne is most common in women. And as you get older, you actually become twice as likely to have acne if you're a woman than if you're a man. And as further support for the fact that acne is very often caused by hormonal issues, the most common and effective treatments for acne, at least in women, are hormonal contraceptives as well as androgen blockers like spironolactone. But what is causing these hormonal issues in the first place that's present in westernized societies or industrialized societies, but not in these tribal hunter-gatherer settings? Well, there is a very common hormone disruptor that pretty much all of us are being exposed to constantly in industrialized society, but get none of in these hunter-gatherer societies. And that is plastic. Because plastics, including BPA as well as replacements for BPA that are labeled as BPA-free, are known endocrine disruptors, which means that they mess with our hormones. And these endocrine disruptors in plastic are called xenoestrogens because they bind to estrogen receptors, and they kind of act like estrogen in that they can take up all our receptors and prevent real estrogen from getting to them. But instead of acting like estrogen at the receptors, they often cause cascades of very bad things. So, to put it simply, they prevent your real estrogen from being able to do what it needs to do, and instead they kind of wreak havoc on your estrogen receptors. And note that this isn't only relevant for women, because men also have estrogen, and these xenoestrogens affect men too. And for a pretty crazy example of how dramatic these effects can be, it's been found that water that is highly polluted with xenoestrogens have a much, much, much higher incidence of hermaphroditism in the animals that live there, like polar bears and fish and seagulls and alligators, are way more likely to have both male and female reproductive organs because they live in this water with a bunch of xenoestrogens. And I want to quickly note that xenoestrogens are very different from phytoestrogens because even though they both sort of mimic estrogen, phytoestrogens actually do a bunch of good things for us. In fact, fun fact, the media loves to talk about how great resveratrol is for everything and how drinking red wine will save your life from everything bad. But what they don't talk about is that resveratrol is a phytoestrogen, just like soy. And yet the media loves to demonize soy because they don't like soy products, but they do love their red wine. So generally, phytoestrogens are very good for us, whereas xenoestrogens are very bad for us. And for direct evidence, a study found that people who have acne have way higher levels of BPA in their body than people who do not have acne. And more dramatically, beyond that, they found that the severity of acne was really strongly correlated with people's BPA levels. So people who had higher levels of BPA in their body had way higher levels of acne, so way more severe acne. And they found that people who had higher levels of BPA in their body had a younger onset for the age that they got acne. So people got acne younger when they had higher levels of BPA. And just as a fun comparison for the magnitude of this effect size, you may remember a few videos ago in my social media algorithm effects on the brain video, there was a study that assessed people's TikTok addiction scores and used them to predict how much time people actually spent on TikTok. And the correlation between TikTok addiction scores and actual TikTok use is weaker than the correlation between BPA levels and acne. So BPA seems to be a very, very strong predictive factor in acne. So you may have noticed I really focused on BPA for the last two findings I've shared with you. But is it just BPA? Almost certainly not. A little known horrifying fact is that in 2016, the US president signed a law that potentially toxic chemicals that could be used to replace BPA, for example, are innocent until proven guilty. So there are a lot of things being labeled BPA-free that contain these chemicals and toxins that are innocent until proven guilty, but studies have shown that they are also endocrine disruptors, so things like BPS and BPF are used to replace BPA in these nice BPA-free labeled plastics, but they've been shown to be just as bad, if not worse, by emerging studies. And I use the US as an example because our president signed that really lovely law directly showing how bad things are, but the situation isn't better in other countries, really. Now, I know I've been sharing a lot of bad news so far, but there is some very good news, which is the fact that BPA and these different analogs do not seem to be forever chemicals that stick around in your body forever. So the levels of BPA in your body really fluctuate. So if you lower your exposure, you should be able to really lower your BPA levels. And so I'm going to share some steps you can take to reduce your exposure to the most harmful forms of plastic that are most likely to be contributing to acne and hormonal issues for you. And before I give you this list, I just want to make clear that I am not suggesting that anyone follow all these things and cut out all plastic from their life, because it's just not feasible really to have a high quality of life and cut out all plastic. However, I think if more people are informed about this issue and try to make small changes in the areas that are easiest for them, then companies will start to take notice as the public starts demanding more plastic alternatives, and I hope that we can move towards a future where we can avoid plastic without lowering our quality of life. So I just want to add that caveat. This is not a crazy cut out everything in your life type of recommendation, but rather I am sharing a list of the most effective things you could do to reduce your exposure to BPA as well as BPS and BPF. And a first general heuristic that will probably prove most useful in trying to avoid BPA is the fact that hot food or liquids plus plastic equals bad, because when you have hot food or liquid in plastic, a lot of plastic leaches out into that food or drink. And it's even worse if you put it in the microwave, because that really amplifies leaching. So one of the biggest ways you can reduce your exposure to plastic is just to not put hot food or drink in plastic. And now I'll list some of the biggest specific sources of plastic and BPA and BPS and BPF exposure. And the first of those is coffee cups. And this is probably one of the worst, according to studies, because even the paper coffee cups that don't seem very plasticky are actually leaching tens of thousands of microplastics into your coffee because they are lined in plastic and they have those plastic lids. And I want to note, after the specific list, I'm going to share very specific solutions for how you can get less exposure from these activities without too much hassle. So in addition to coffee cups, another major one is using plastic wrap over your food when you're microwaving it. That's going to leach a lot of plastic. And then also, unfortunately, a huge one is takeout containers. So especially those plastic ones you'll get like soup in, or any wet foods are going to be really bad. But even the ones for dry foods are often coated in plastic. And styrofoam is also problematic. And then most people have heard of this one, disposable plastic water bottles if they get hot, and pretty much any water bottles if they get hot are going to be particularly problematic. And before I get into specific alternatives for these things, I want to add a little extra bonus fact here. And that is the fact that there is emerging evidence strongly suggesting that nonstick cookware also is an endocrine disruptor, as well as causing other problems like cancer and whatnot. So that is really easy to solve by just replacing with stainless steel. So I just replaced my nonstick stuff because it needed to go anyway, because it was really old, with stainless steel, including my rice cooker, and I love it. Zero problems. I will link everything below that I have bought and enjoy. And now for what I do to reduce my plastic exposure in each of these specific cases I told you about. The first is for coffee, I will use a stainless steel tumbler or a lead-free stoneware tumbler, which I absolutely love. And it's a win-win because a lot of cafes will give you a discount for bringing your own container, even if they don't list it. You should ask. And then also it keeps your coffee warm for much longer than those little paper cups. So I've actually really enjoyed my coffee experience more since I started just bringing my own mug to cafes. And in terms of containers for hot food, you can use glass ones. I always used glass Tupperware anyway because they're just nicer and don't get all scratched up and stained and whatnot. So that one's easy. And then a little known replacement for pretty much any type of plastic is silicone, and has been shown to be a lot safer than plastic and doesn't really have any problems associated with it that we have been able to identify. So that's good news. And you can get silicone water bottles. I have one that I enjoy, linking it below. And then for baby bottles, you can also get silicone baby bottles. And you can get silicone microwave covers for your food to replace plastic wrap. And you can also get silicone Ziploc in sandwich bag replacements. So I've gotten silicone gallon bags recently that I'm enjoying, that I've been using for the freezer even, and they work well. And the stickiest one that I don't have a super clear solution for yet is takeout, which I think will require a more societal change to get us to move towards things that are less poisonous to store our food in. But the only change I've really made there is being a little more mindful about which foods we get as takeout versus going out to eat. So for example, when we want pho, which is always stored as an extremely boiling liquid in extremely cheap plastic as takeout, in terms of all the restaurants we go to here, we now go to the restaurant instead of getting that as takeout. However, I do still sometimes eat hot food out of plastic takeout containers. I'm not going to stop eating takeout completely or stop going to my favorite food trucks that don't even have a non-plastic option, but it just helps to be a little more mindful, I think. So if you do have options for maybe you get more sushi as takeout and get your soup in person, that could help reduce your plastic exposure in a pretty easy way. Now, I want to make clear that I am not saying that plastic is the cause of acne, but rather that it is likely to be a strong contributor given that it is an endocrine disruptor and is strongly correlated with acne. But I think we should be suspicious of anything that is known to disrupt our hormones, like dairy, for example, which is one of the biggest, if not the biggest, dietary contributor to acne, and is why many dermatologists recommend cutting it out. So anything that is messing with our hormones, whether it's from our diet or from plastic or from other influences, should be a suspect in terms of causing acne. So I thought I would share this, not only because I think it's a really interesting finding, but because there's a decent chance it could help you with your acne, and because cutting out plastic is going to be better for your health anyway, and better for the environment. So it's a win-win-win. And I want to add a little meta-science caveat that I see around sometimes, where people say that we don't have enough human randomized controlled trial evidence to be sure that things like plastic and BPA are bad for us. And one thing that people pretty much never think about, unless they are in science, is the fact that we cannot do randomized controlled trials for many things, specifically things that would be unethical to do. So if we already have strong enough suspicions that something is toxic based on animal studies and associations that we want to finally test it in humans, it is unethical to do so. So by the time that we have enough evidence to really run that study, we can no longer run that study. Because in Western science, we are not allowed, for good reason, to give people toxic things that we strongly suspect are going to cause them long-term health issues like cancer or even acne. Because we need ethics approval for studies, which is a good thing to prevent the horrible types of prison experiments we used to see where people were experimented on and had their lives ruined. We can't do that. So we are probably never going to get good randomized controlled trial evidence that things like plastic and nonstick cookware are directly damaging our health. So for example, with smoking, we had to figure it out through association studies and animal studies, because we can't just tell people to smoke cigarettes and see if they get lung cancer in 20 years. And this kind of phenomenon is pretty illuminating for understanding why the government is not directly acting on these things, because they're insidious, it's hard for people to see, happens over the long term through a lot of small exposures, and we can't do randomized controlled trials on them in people. So people are just going to forever say, well, there's not enough human evidence, until finally there's enough, like with BPA, that people start to wake up. So there's my little meta-science caveat / food for thought. Now the story on how plastics affect us overall is way bigger and more interesting than just this little acne piece of the puzzle. But I don't want to bore you by talking too much about plastics and whatnot, so I would love to hear if you are interested in hearing more about how plastics affect us from scientific studies. So I hope you found this useful or at least interesting, and if you want to help support me in making videos, for one-time support, head over to my GoFundMe, and for more regular support, you can head on over to my Patreon to sign up for bonus content and extra findings between videos, the ability to weigh in on videos, and the ability to ask me research requests where I will go and deep dive on a topic to answer some question you have. So if you're interested in that, I have a link up here and below. And if you like this video, please share and like it so we can get this information out there, because the more people know this, the more we will have plastic-free options, because companies ultimately will want to make products that people want to buy, and people are only going to want to buy them if they have a reason to buy them. So let's give them a reason and get this information out there. And if you haven't already, please hit the subscribe button and the notification bell below to stay up to date on all this science. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.